Hi there and welcome to the channel of A Disappointed Man with me, Jason Kennedy, the Disappointed Man. And in this video I'll be talking about Rex Warner's 1941 novel, The Aerodrome. Now, I believe I'm safe in saying that the name of Rex Warner is not on many lips today, so we'll begin with a little biographical information. He was born in 1905 in the city of Birmingham, my home city, and he was the son of a clergyman. And he attended Oxford, where he studied classics. And while there, he was friends with fellow poets and writers such as Auden, Spender, and Cecil Day Lewis. And while he wrote a number of novels, of which The Aerodrome is the best regarded, he was also a noted classicist. And it's perhaps his translations of many Greek writers which constitutes the greater part of his cultural legacy, as it were. So, what is The Aerodrome all about? The novel is narrated by a young man named Roy who lives in an unnamed village, and the story opens on the occasion of his 21st birthday, and it's late at night and he's lying on his back in the mud recalling the incredible events of the evening because his supposed father, the rector, and his wife have convened a coming-of-age party for him, attended by the local squire, who's rather old and desiccated, his sister, and a flight lieutenant from the nearby aerodrome. And the rector has chosen this occasion to announce that he is not in fact Roy's father, but rather Roy was a foundling. And as Roy lies on his back in the mud, he is in a state of turmoil. And here are his ruminations on this disclosure. I know well that to many readers of this story, the grief and destitution which I felt at this time will seem extravagant. All my memories were of this place, the churchyard, the gardens, the paths and hedges, and of its people, the rector and his wife, the squire and his sister, our gardener, and later the landlord's daughter, and the young men with whom I had played football against neighbouring villages, or darts in our own public house. I had believed myself a native of this country, had acted and grown up as such. Should an accident of parentage make all this difference then? Is not the fiction that has been firmly believed as good as true? I can only say that I did not find it so. When I lay drunk in the mud, I had been able to forget my sorrow, but now it returned upon me, in pangs of uncertainty and desperation, like the wounds of love. I sat up and stared over the dark pool before me, remembering what may seem to others such a trifling point, that I did not know who I was. Now wait a moment. A squire? A rector? A foundling? An English village? This can only call to mind one novel, Henry Fielding's Tom Jones, his 1748 comic masterpiece. And yes, on one level, The Aerodrome is a highly compressed retelling of Tom Jones. It even features the mistaken incestuous relationship motif. However, there are a number of key differences. The chief difference, of course, is the aerodrome itself, this alien presence in the English landscape. And whereas Tom Jones goes off and leaves the village to have his adventures, Roy takes on an uneasy dual existence because he accepts the invitation to become an airman, and he becomes a highly successful pilot. But as part of life at the aerodrome, you have to undergo a process of indoctrination, and this serves to both distance Roy from village life and from his previous acquaintances, and also brings him more and more under the wing, so to speak, of the Air Vice Marshal, an extremely commanding figure. I'll give you a brief sample of the Air Vice Marshal's rhetoric, and this will also prepare the ground for my analysis. He speaks like this: I should like you to understand that it is by no means sufficient to blame society for its inefficiency, its waste, its stupidity. These are merely symptoms. It is against the souls of the people themselves that we are fighting. It is each and every one of their ideas that we must detest. Think of them as earthbound, grovelling from one piece of mud to another, and feebly imagining distinctions between the two. incapable of envisaging a distant objective, tied up forever in their miserable and unimportant histories, indeed in the whole wretched and blind history of man on earth. Religion, which for many centuries did exercise an ennobling, if a misleading effect, has gone. The race which we, of all people, are now required to protect is a race of money makers and sentimentalists, undisciplined except by forces which they do not understand, insensitive to all except the lowest, the most ordinary, the most mechanical stimuli. Protect it? We shall destroy what we cannot change. Not very rousing, I think you'll agree, but what I find so interesting there is what is being attacked, namely this idea of drawing a meaningful distinction between, in the Air Vice Marshal's words, one piece of mud and another, because that really recalled for me the novels of Thomas Hardy. Isn't it the lifeblood of Hardy's vision, such distinctions between one piece of mud and another? If we look at Under the Greenwood Tree, which I reviewed for this channel, we see there all these minute distinctions being made within a very small village between a very small number of inhabitants. And Hardy is alive to the threat that technological progress poses to these distinctions, that it erases them. In Under the Greenwood Tree, the technology in question is a church organ, and it's also embodied in the persons of the new schoolmistress and the new parson. If we move forward to the beginning of the 20th century and look at George Douglas Brown's The House with the Green Shutters, which I've also reviewed, we see there that the technology that threatens the rhythms of rural life in a Scottish village is the coming of the railways. And so what I see being embodied in the figure of the Air Vice Marshal is the perennial threat that technological progress poses to the English rural landscape and its way of life. Now, there is support for what I'm saying in the text itself, and it comes in the crisis that Roy faces towards the end of the novel when he's faced with a choice between the new way of life being proposed by the Air Vice Marshal and a return to the traditional village life with all its tangled relationships. And I'll just read you this passage where he's weighing one way of life against the other. It goes like this. It had been gradually, almost insensibly, that I had lost touch with the country where I had been bred, looking down on it from the sky with a kind of contempt, indifferent to the changes of climate and of seasons, the rising and falling of the ground, except in so far as these things affected the readings of my instruments, or the immediate purpose of the hour. Now I thought with longing and with shame for my neglect of them, of the meadows whose soil I had not touched for so long, of the clumps of hazel in the spinneys beneath which the primroses and wood anemones would be flowering. And I saw again the stalks of the primroses in Bessie's lap, and it seemed to me certain that there was more life even in her despair, even in the rector's rankling conscience, even in the flight lieutenant's perplexity, than there was in the ease, efficiency and confidence of our ways. In contrast with the villagers, with women, with clergymen and squires, we were simple, carefree and direct, having made ourselves the servants of a single will and imagination, constituting as a result an instrument that could shape like clay, cut through like butter the vague, amorphous, drunken, unwieldy and unsatisfactory life that was outside our organization. Yet I began to see that this life, in spite of its drunkenness and its inefficiency, was wider and deeper than the activity in which we were constricted by the iron compulsion of the Air Vice Marshal's ambition. It was a life whose very vagueness concealed a wealth of opportunity, whose uncertainty called for adventure, whose aspects were innumerable and varied as the changes of light and colour throughout the year. It was a life whose unwieldiness was the consequence of its immensity. That sounds like Thomas Hardy defending his art. So, you will not be surprised by the decision Roy makes, but you will be surprised when the actual blood relations between the principal characters are revealed at the novel's end because they add a whole new layer of meaning to all of the major events in this story. So there we have it. To recap, what Rex Warner does with the Aerodrome is telescope the 18th, 19th and 20th century novels into a very surreal work of fiction. I found it very enjoyable and highly amusing. It's a very dark comedy. Before departing, I want to have one more section here because we cannot ignore the fact that this novel had an enormous impact on another great writer, J.G. Ballard. So I'll just talk about that briefly and then we'll finish. Ballard's writings share the surrealism of Rex Warner's, but writing in the 60s, his characters, unlike Roy, no longer have the choice of returning to an earlier way of life. Their natural habitat is in the vast suburbs of Greater London that have sprung up with the construction of the orbital roads, a process begun in the 60s and completed in the 70s. And the utopian figures in Ballard's fiction are not military men like the Air Vice Marshal, but civic planners and architects. And in what I believe is his finest novel, High Rise, we see how an architect has produced what he believes is the ideal place for executives to live, and instead it degenerates into an absolute hell as all of the messiness of the human psyche spills out and destroys his dream. So if you enjoy the writings of J.G. Ballard, you'll certainly enjoy the Aerodrome, and that's all I have to say. And so I will be true to my word and say farewell. Be safe, be strong, and until the next time, Nanu Nanu.